Okay, so we're going to poll as we go sit down. How many people do use please and thank you, if not all the time, usually? Okay, how many people never do it? Okay, I heard someone explaining why they do it. Do you want to give the pitch of why you do it and introduce yourself? Go ahead and stand up.
My name is Jan. I saw some studies that actually say you get better answers.
Yeah, I also heard yesterday, I was listening to Ezra Klein, he has a podcast, that you get better responses in ChatGPT in March than you do December. Anyone want to know why?
Yeah.
Why?
No, I want to.
Oh, you want to know why? That's fair, that's what I asked. Supposedly in December, it thinks it's on vacation because they've read data that December is vacation time, but they don't really understand why, but it's pretty consistent. So please and thank you may get you better answers and use March and April, but maybe not around Easter holidays. Okay, so if I can have the panels. Pardon? They don't take, yeah, but we, yeah, I know, but we do. Go ahead, anywhere. Yeah, there's more seats, don't be afraid. Except for Ada, be afraid of her. Super, so I'll give you just a quick little run of show here. I'm super excited to have
Are we going to sing?
Do you want to?
It just feels that way.
I've been known to. Have you been known to?
Not with anybody staying in the room.
Ada's been known to too, I can imagine. So thank you to the three of you for coming. I couldn't imagine three better people to be talking about AI and politics. So close to an election in this country, but there's elections going on around the world. I'm going to internationalize us a little bit and then come back to the UK. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give a quick summary of a report that we did. I'll give you context for that. And then I have some quick fire questions for each of you. First, we have Elizabeth Seger, who's at Demos, the head of tech policy, and particularly been looking a lot at AI, so can't imagine anyone better here today. Paul Hilder, who we've known for quite some time. We're both aging quite well, a couple of decades, yeah. CEO of Datapraxis, and really, I call him a political wizard. I think you scoffed at that a little bit. Is that okay?
It's a little embarrassing.
Okay, yeah, it's only because you're British. Americans would love it. Okay. And then Catherine Mayer, the co-founder of the Women's Equality Party, but much more than that. I mean, you each are much more than that, but also a former journalist, which I think you will see in her responses. And also, you started a data think tank, correct? So you spent a lot of time thinking about data and how it intersects. Wonderful. So I'm going to give you just a quick little preview of a report that we had out about AI and politics. And why we thought it was important is kind of obvious. More people are voting this year, biggest year for democracy. So how is this technology? You could see in the spectrum here, short term, most people thought pretty dangerous, long term, possibly better. I am not an AI specialist. I'm definitely not an AI and politics specialist. Probably hardly anyone could call themselves an expert. It's all so new. So what we did is, I'll tell you, we went and talked to folks. So first, anyone have an example of, welcome, anyone have an example of how AI has been used in politics so far this year, or in the last 12 months? Any examples? Not you guys. Anyone? Yeah, back there. And just introduce yourself. Okay, yeah. Deepfake. The mayor here. Anybody else? Okay. So there's a few. I live in Germany. Annalena Baerbock has been dealing with a lot of deepfakes. A couple quick statistics on the impact of women. Women candidates are getting hit by deepfakes. Very sexualized porn stuff. So much that some research that partners of ours have shown that 80 to 85% of women are getting threats online, and many of them are turning into threats offline. That's even more in context of underrepresented groups like women of color in the United States. It's really, really bad. And 1 out of 6 women are not finishing their first term. They're dropping out because of violence. Now, I'm not saying that's all AI related. There's a lot of non-AI stuff. Many of you probably knew Jo Cox, a good friend, an MP who lost her life. That was before AI. There's been violence in politics a very long time, but we're seeing acceleration of it right now. Anyone follow the Indonesian election? Yeah? AI was used a lot in that election. The new president used a lot of it and very cartoonized it. It became kind of a pop thing, very active. You were talking here about Sadiq Khan and the AI and audio deepfakes. And then I just want to give you a positive answer about how this is being responded to. There's an organization called Troll Wall that's actually using technology to fight technology. So it's all over. People are saying this is going to be the AI and political year. I don't think it is quite yet, because I think mostly nefarious forces have it. So let me just tell you a little bit about what we found out. Sorry, that's it. So we did, we went around the world and said who has something interesting to say about this. And particularly when I say around the world, we wanted to talk to people in different contexts. So it's not just the US or the UK. And we interviewed people, and we did a bunch of polling about what we heard, so surveys and desk research and some live events. And I guess I'll go here. And you can see we talked to Irene from Kenya, the work, anyone following the Indian election closely. AI is being used nefariously and actually quite positively. Adam was talking about the use of multi-language, building empathy. There's really interesting stuff, and Seger is one of the experts, and you can see the experts. So we just talked to some folks about what they thought. Okay, so I want to do a big frame about how we're going to think about this topic. Most of you, I imagine, answered AI in the context of elections. I think partially because we've kind of limited ourselves, a lot of us, to thinking about politics as elections. Politics is much more than about elections. Demos is doing a lot of work on citizen participation and really broadening that. Anyone here work in the democracy space in general? No? I mean, we have folks in government, so you work in the democracy space for sure. So when we think about politics, we think about the entire political leadership impact path. So not just elections, but how might AI be used, recruiting people into office? Catherine, you all recruit people to join your political party, and they find you. When they do join the party, when they run for office, transition, and the part I'm quite interested in too is how we're using AI once politicians are in office to do crowdsourcing and things like that, and then leaving. So the context which I'm going to talk to you about this is through that entire path. So the first, I'm going to share some top insights, and then we'll get to the panelists. So the first one is that despite downsides, there can be some big upsides to AI in politics. In the short term, it's going to take some time to work out, but we're particularly seeing the downsides impacting female candidates. I've been electing people for 30 years, and in every context, women have been behind in using technology. That was even when we had direct mail, and then email came, and then social media came. Underrepresented or underfinanced, depends on the context. We're often later to the uptake of technology, which is why we're kind of racing to close that gap. And I really want to underscore what Adam said. It does have a possibility. I talked here about the underrepresented groups really hitting the pitfalls of this. AI doesn't appear to be used before. So right now we're seeing it, you remember in that impact path, in the recruiting and getting new people in. Who talked about politicians? We have midgets. How do we get, the midgets, and how do we use getting people into politics? How do we recruit people who might have the right characteristics, resilience, match sentiments of their constituents? How are we using that matching system? It's basically not being used anywhere in the world unless someone has heard of it. No, not yet. I think it's a big opportunity. Obviously, we talked about this. I think it was you over here talked about the ethical use. We're not going to talk about regulation today. Is anyone following the regulatory framework on this in Europe, mostly in the UK? You following it in the UK, yeah? We're not going to, and Europe, yeah? I know the MP who's sponsoring that legislation to pass it. Oh, it's very persnickety. Go to the good old hand. One of the things that there's a lot of excitement about is how to use AI to build trust with citizens when politicians are in office. How might that happen? Anyone? Be creative, yeah.
Engagement at the micro level, the ability to kind of gauge public feeling about sentiments about certain topics very, very quickly.
What do referendums usually ask?
Well, the referenda are usually yes or no.
Right, they're binary.
Yeah,
and
this doesn't have to be binary.
Right, AI can be much more inclusive and much more sentiment analysis, something called quadratic voting. Has anyone heard of quadratic voting? It's a way to measure the depth of how you feel something. Just imagine the Brexit vote, if you asked how strongly do you feel about it, would there have been a different outcome? Probably, I don't know that for sure. But they're testing this in legislatures all over the country, in the US and around the world, dial voting on things. How strongly do I feel? And I think that's quite interesting. We are not so binary. Hi there. Next, we should explore how AI can be used to decrease polarization. We know now that it's adding to polarization. Has anyone heard of the filter bubble? Yeah, so this is basically how AI kind of drives you further into people who agree exactly with what you believe already. So how might AI be used to unwind that? There's very little work being done on this right now. It's only really being done in the more, I find polarization nefarious, so that's my opinion. I imagine most people find it nefarious. Anyone want to argue with me that it's not? It's good for society? I dare you. I'll buy you a drink. You're not brave, none of you. Obviously, we need the tools and norms. One of the things that we hear very loud and clear, has anyone seen the biases that's going into the data right now? It's basically Western North data that's being scraped. And so we don't have representative views in ChatGPT. If ChatGPT were, I'm trying to, political party, I don't know on that. If ChatGPT would be on the spectrum of conservative to far right to far left, what would it be? Anyone guess? Has anyone seen the analysis on this? It would be center left, more to the left. Yeah, there's a really interesting test you can take about yourself and then how it stacks up to ChatGPT. It's something we need to be aware of. It's going to change over time, or it will reinforce itself. So it's quite interesting. We need much more. Any researchers in here? Anyone researching this? Anyone researching AI? No? There's just not a lot in this area of politics whatsoever, so there's a big need of it, and that we need to invest in entrepreneurs. Any entrepreneurs developing tools in this space? Yeah, Adam, can you tell us a little bit about your tool?
Yeah, we're developing something we've spotted in terms of local government in the UK. There's a massive problem with a particular source of report that has to be drafted for kids who need special support in the classroom for special education. So we're investigating if it's possible to use generative AI in order to help speed up that process. So kind of do a first draft. So, you know, with all the ethical considerations around that, and kind of like the data we're using, the process it goes through, it's a really hard problem to solve. But if we can do it, you know, it'll help support like 1.2 million children, you know, as quickly as we can roll it out. So that's been a really interesting sort of space to look at. But, you know, it's as you go around and talk to people, you just start seeing in government at different tiers, there's all of these things. Walk out of a meeting and sort of say, oh, another thing. It's kind of like a Columbo moment.
Yeah.
Oh, and another thing, another thing. So that's kind of that, I think, kind of with people in the right positions of authority and understanding, there's some really cool stuff that can happen. And it's, you know, it's a very interesting space to join.
Yeah, interesting and expensive, right? An expensive space. Well, yes. You can build applications on top of it, but if you want access to large data and the servers, so there's a lot of folks looking about how do you get money to folks who aren't well capacitated. How much money is Sam Altman trying to raise right now? Anyone know? For $7 trillion. I don't think a lot of NGOs working on privacy and AI have probably $700,000 in the bank right now. So there's a huge gap. You're probably going to talk a little bit about this, I imagine.
I can.
You can.
Yeah.
Super. So I just wanted to leave you with a couple things. So what we do at the Apolitical Foundation is we're helping not just in AI, but think about what does it mean to be a 21st century politician. You cannot be a 21st century politician and not understand how this is changing, not just how politics works, but how we are changing as a society, right? So we do a lot of work on looking at that. And then at Apolitical, we are working very closely with civil servants around the world to understand how governments are using AI. We have regular reports that we put out, and we help upskill public servants on how to use this ethically and responsibly inside of government. So with that, and then obviously you can read our report. It's more interesting than I am because you get to hear with people on the front lines using the work day to day. So speaking of more interesting than I am, I'm going to turn to you guys. So Paul, first I'd be very curious of the report because I know you read it so carefully. supposed to laugh at that, Paul. Thank
I
you.
was very serious about it.
Oh, you were, okay. I'm going to ask each of you in a word or two, followed by a description, what stood out about the report to you?
Well, shall I go first?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sitting next to you. I'll go first. The thing that jumped out at me was your line in the preface about a collective shift from defense to offense, which is something that I have heard people say in multiple rooms beforehand, and tried to do a little bit in our own work. And I fundamentally agree that we need to put a lot of emphasis on how do we do that. And I'm also very conscious of the pressing need for defense, which I think is probably something we're going to circle around here. But I thought the report did a good job of summing up both.
Yeah, I think in a similar vein, I was taken by the emphasis on the benefits, which you don't see in a lot of reports about AI and elections and democracy right now. And I think it's good to focus on those benefits. I would be cautious not to overstate them for this coming election cycle. I think there's something we were talking about earlier. There's something definitely to be said about the fact that, that they're more likely to be misused before they're going to be used correctly. It's you have to find the vulnerabilities and the misuse first before you can fix them, and we're still in the finding stage. So I think be prepared for that eventuality.
Great. I mean, the room agreed with you, right? They agreed that in the short term it was bad, but potentially longer. Catherine?
Yeah, no, I agreed with both Paul and Elizabeth on that. I think my feeling is one, as I say, I am an optimist, even though I don't sound like one, but I think that there's also a lot of misunderstanding about what doing politics is like on the ground when you're a smaller party. So, for example, that political leadership impact path really does apply to bigger organizations. When you talk about the opportunities of tools that people could use, really that requires a kind of resourcing, both in terms of people and knowledge and money. Money still absolutely talks in every political system. And one of the experiences of a small party like ours is that there is an increasing gap between regulation and reality. So, as you know, all tech regulation struggles to keep up with the realities of tech. Everything that is supposed to keep the political system fair and stable, in fact, more and more shuts out outsiders, disadvantages the already disadvantaged, and privileges people who are already incumbents and have money. Just as an example, if you look at the laws to stop dark money coming into politics, it adds this huge burden of administration onto everyone, which is very easily circumvented by the kinds of people who have money coming often from Russia and China and whatever. But it doesn't, if you're doing it honestly and on a small scale, it doesn't. On your point about recruitment, and you mentioned data sets, and women make up, as we know, more than 50% of the population, but even before data inequality, only 0.5% of all recorded history actually deals with female history. Data sets that are used for training, Wikipedia, for example, one of the big data sets, that's 85% white men generated and 85% about white men. And there are lots of reasons why marginalized people don't appear in data sets, often because they don't want to, they're scared, they go to ground deliberately. And then you have the black box technology that people don't know what it is. Now, if with women's equality, you're always trying to get women in the room, you're always trying to get representation in the room. AI is like a room that has not only the wrong people in it, but you don't really know who's in it, and you have no way to query that.
So I'm going to go from sort of stand out of the reports, sort of opportunity, offense, but we have to play defense. Opportunity, but let's be careful about this in the short term, right? And then talking about the disadvantage of sort of not having power already and being left out. Now I want to just go from the big picture specifically. In the last 6 months, you've been watching elections. I'm sure you, Paul, around the world. They've been all over, from El Salvador, if anyone's been following that, to Indonesia, Argentina, which people say was the first election that used AI, at least generative AI. I'm curious what has stood out to you globally.
So you are seeing this technology being used really in every serious election now. It's becoming pervasive. There are some good examples of antibodies developing to the more nefarious uses of it. So I think the Sadiq Khan disinformation, that audio was a very good example, actually, because it was picked up very rapidly, and there was very swift rebuttal of it across mainstream media. At the same time, it was seen by millions of people and consumed by millions of people during that period of time. A lot of the people who are consuming these things are lower information voters who are less likely to see a rebuttal of it in mainstream media. And so I think even those antibodies are not quite working. We've seen a lot of talk in public affairs about how, deepfakes can be countered by the platforms, and in practice on YouTube, I just went and checked, they've got an honor system where you have to label it yourself, which it's very easy for someone to pop up a YouTube account that is completely fresh and then burn it, with an AI video that they don't say is an AI video, and it's been halfway around the world before anyone finds it. So I think that we're in the middle of a real maelstrom of nefarious uses of this stuff, and it is much easier to destroy than to create and build good things, and there are scaled machines, disinformation and election disruption machines that are being prepared for the tail end of this year. So I think maybe we'll see a bit less of it in the UK than we do in the US, but we're going to see an enormous amount in the US because the Russians and the Chinese and some of the Gulf states and various other people will all be practicing. So that's the downside. I'm seeing lots of people explore how this technology could be used in ways that could contribute to positive outcomes, and some of that's very sort of early stage testing. I'm seeing people, for instance, if you have someone really horrible and they've said something, and you have only got the quote, you don't have the audio, you can turn that audio into a quote, and you can say, yes, we've done this through AI, but they said that. And you can go and find it, and here's where you can go and find it. So you can bring things to life that you couldn't bring to life previously, which are true, not false. That's one way in which you can use it. Another thing that you can do, we've been doing a little bit of this, is quite often when I'm working with politicians, I run a consultancy, does a lot of work with parties, politicians, we help them try and figure out, okay, how would it change things if you said things a little bit differently, if you were a little bit braver, for instance, or a little bit clearer, or if you talked about mental health or something. And what you can do using AI is you can do basically an ethical deepfake where you show the politician saying something that they might not be comfortable to or have the time to say, and then show them how people respond to that in practice. And that's very interesting because it gives you a way of exploring possible worlds. And then the politician can make the decision, which possible world do I like? But it gives them a little bit of information and takes out some of the fear and uncertainty in the process. Bunch of other things going on, but I've probably spoken enough.
No, that's great. Did you just hear what he said? He said an ethical deepfake. Well, I'm just curious, maybe Elizabeth,
Being provocative.
And I've been hearing this too, and it's interesting in our minds, deepfake is a bad thing, but you just said ethical, and the use case seems like it could be ethical. So I'm just curious, this is off script, Elizabeth, but do you know, or if anyone, where did deepfake first get named, and would you call something that was ethical a deepfake?
I mean, I'm not sure where the name first came from, but it is the name that's been given to it. It's the faking of content via deep learning processes. So that's the name. Obviously, it has kind of a negative connotation. Right now, I mean, the other name is just artificially generated content. So I think, like, yeah, you can have ethically generated artificially generated content. So like one example of this, you had the example of the elections in Indonesia. And I personally don't think that like that wasn't, I mean, it wasn't even really a deep fake. They were using AI to generate cartoons to make the political leader look like fun and cuddly and jolly. And it's sort of like, yeah, we can draw those. I mean, Pixar does that. It lowers the barrier to entry, makes it easier for individuals to do. But do we have a problem with cartoons? So, I mean, I think there probably are instances that can be very ethical, good applications.
Well, just let me comment on that, and then Elizabeth, I want to hear. Get you some water. Here, I'll pass you some water. Yeah, and I just 1 second. Yeah, I'll get you 1 second.
Yeah.
Do you want to, Paul? Again,
I'll do the
what a
water.
gentleman! Look at that. I just want to follow up, and not for you yet, Catherine, but I want to say one thing we're hearing on that is that for people who don't have as much budget, the creation of the fuzzy, happy candidate is much cheaper than it used to be. I mean, I've worked on campaigns, and a lot of like video creation was so expensive that this is lowering the cost of barrier to entry. So I want you to talk about that later. Like, what are you seeing the upsides for female candidates with that? But what are you seeing in the last 6 months that's interesting to you about AI in politics?
Yeah, so AI, there's a few things. To touch on that point really quickly about how it's easier for everyone to generate this content, I think one of the important things to remember in this discussion is that these aren't all new problems. Like we've had Photoshop, we have all of these things. It's lowering barrier of entry for some people, usually individual actors, to be able to do this. It's really important to keep in mind the idea of marginal additional risk that AI poses. So that's whatever the additional risk that AI is posing on top of capabilities we already have. So like how much worse are these capabilities on top of being able to Photoshop? Or for example, often this is discussed with respect to chatbots, and like you can ask ChatGPT, how do you build a bomb or something like that. And it's like, it's actually not that problematic if it's not giving you a better answer than if you were to just Google it. So I think keeping in mind that is important. And so thinking about what is the marginal additional risk going to be for elections. And I think the answer is like for big state actors that have lots of money and are well organized, it might not actually give them that much more uplift based on what they were already able to do. But it opens the door wide for individual actors, less well organized actors. That's who's getting the majority of the uplift in these cases. One of the interesting things that I've seen in these last 6 months, I was particularly taken by the case in Slovakia, where there's a election going on, and there was a deep fake audio of, I think it was the Liberal candidate talking with a journalist about rigging the election. Completely deep fake audio. The interesting thing about this is that it was released during the 48-hour moratorium on media coverage and political campaigning, and so there was no way to like actively debunk this. And I think the really interesting thing about this case for me is that it's not just showing that we need to talk about the technology and what the technology can do and can't do in the hands of the wrong people, but we also need to think about how we as society are working around the technology. To be sort of realistic and practical, the technology is coming, but we also have to think about how our social institutions work around that. So, for example, a lot of countries have some kind of a moratorium, a silence period around their elections. Is that something that's actually going to be feasible and well suited to the situation in this era of really easy deep fake content? It served a purpose once, but that purpose might not be sold. So I think we need to think about that social context as well.
Can I pick up really quickly on that? Because you've actually touched on one of the things that was very active in Brexit as well, which is the way that elections used to work in most countries in the analog days was that everybody saw the same electioneering material, which meant that rebuttals were also open to everyone because they could see what was out there. Now that things can be targeted online, it means that we don't see an awful lot of the content that is directed against us, for example, or against our belief systems. and lies go out there unchallenged for that reason. But, you know, to zoom even further out, we're in an era where we believe everything and nothing. And so you talked about combating disinformation. It's not only about how much time you have to do it, it's about the complexity of combating disinformation in a world which is simultaneously, as I say, credulous and believes absolutely nothing. I was going to give the Sadiq Khan example, but I'll give you another example which is not so obviously political, except that it was. It was when the Princess of Wales altered her photograph. Now, that was using basic AI on a phone. It instantly triggered a series of reactions in the crazily polarized world where the royals have themselves been co-opted into the culture wars. One of the things was that there were already tons of conspiracy theories circulating. Many of those were created or enhanced by AI and carried through the filter bubbles that you talked about. But it then sort of took off massively, the Where's Kate and, you know, the various things where people believed that a video of her was a body double, all that kind of thing. Now, the UK government thinks that there is a link between those conspiracy theories, China, Russia, and Iran. They think that there was state interference there. And so when you're talking about politics, when you're talking about what happens, you're not just talking about the obvious kind of, you know, oh, I do that to get a march on my political rival. You're seeing disruption that is quite deliberate and confusion. On the point about deepfakes and misogyny, you know, the deepfake has only existed as a word, I think, since 2019. There has been a 3,000% increase in deepfake abuse videos since 2019. In 2023, there were as many deepfake abuse videos in that year as there had been in all the years leading up to that. Misogyny in politics and the use of sex-based imagery in politics is nothing new. When Dilma Rousseff stood in Brazil, are you aware of the campaign that her rival ran? So there was a whole thing about her involvement with the petrol company. And so they produced stickers that went around the opening for petrol in the car that was her with her legs spread. And the whole, so that when you filled your car, you stuck the nozzle through her legs. Now, that was, you know, a big part of that particular election campaign. We are now in a world where it is extremely easy to produce that kind of thing online and circulate it online, and where we will not know, you know, we won't know what is out there to combat it. And one last point on the money point, if I could afford Paul's services, oh my God, that would be wonderful. But, you know, when you're talking about resourcing, I don't know how much you cost, but I think you're beyond my beyond my abilities to beyond the party's abilities to pay. And that's again, you do get data inequality all the way along the line here.
Paul, I want to ask you about how quantum different does this feel? I mean, you were saying, Catherine, that people are saying things about you that you don't know. That was probably always true in life, right? I know what people were saying about me.
But this is scale.
Well, but
this is
this is what I'm going to ask is that I was in politics, like many of you, before there was email, and then before there was social media. So I'm just curious, how different does this feel on a quantum? Like, does this feel like right now 1,000% different? Or I'm just curious too, Elizabeth, from your analysis, like, because you're saying deepfakes have been around, photoshopping's been around, like how different does AI feel in changing politics?
So, I mean, I think there's always been a swamp in politics, and weird and interesting ideas and things that people say. One of the things that happened with the internet and social media is it had this, in inverted commas, democratizing effect, which, you know, I sort of was very involved in, helped build petition platforms and various other things that put this power in people's hands, and a lot of that was positive. You know, there are many good things about human beings, and you know, a lot of that was negative. And we started to see more of the sting in the tail of it over the last decade or so, I would say, particularly as some of the asymmetries of traditional power, things like money, started being mobilized in smart ways which understood the nature of this new dynamics, the nature of this new social reality, and the way in which it could be exploited. And I think that we are now in a stage where there is a sort of Cambrian explosion taking place in terms of what's going on with AI, which I think we're still in the very early stages of, to be honest. I don't think we've seen anything yet. I think November we will see something very interesting in America, and lots of people will be playing with it. And I think it's going to be horrific and fascinating, and then we'll learn hopefully a whole bunch of lessons very rapidly about what to do about that. But we're not on top of the Cambrian explosion at all, and we have to recognize this is out of control. And it's true, I think, at a certain level that, you know, communication in society has been, you know, moving out of control or in and out of control for a long time. I think something qualitatively different and quantitatively different is happening now. And so I do think the defense is super important, and some of the best things I've seen, the most useful things I've seen that use things like deep learning are the systems which identify disinformation very rapidly and then can play that into the right arenas for rebuttal and clarification and all the rest of it. That stuff I think is working really well. It's using deep learning and it's really useful, but we're really at the very early stages of that stuff. I think it's not even like an arms race between good people and bad people. It's something much more chaotic that's happening right now. At the same time, it's super important for us not to treat that as a reason just to sort of throw up our hands and walk away, which is why I really like the possibilities part of your pitfalls and possibilities. And we just need to recognize we're at a really early stage in that.
Elizabeth, as you answer this question about, maybe you can go to what we're going to see in the UK, if you can predict what we're going to see in the UK election, if you want to go as wild as the US election. But can you just give us a tip, if these great folks want to go and kind of stay up on what's going on in AI and politics now, like where do you go to read things?
I have some good newsletters that come through.
Like which ones? Sorry that I didn't prepare you for this.
No, as soon as you put me on the spot, they've all flown out of my head.
Okay, they can come back
to it.
It's okay.
But if anyone comes find me later, I'm sure they'll be back.
Okay.
But I can jump into the next question about prospects for the 2024 elections if you like. So I think there's two big prospects I think we're going to see. The first is we're going to learn a lot. I think, or at least I hope, that we're in this kind of a sweet spot right now, actually, where we have a new technology that's capable enough and throwing new challenges at us that we'll learn from them and we'll get an indication of what's coming down the road. And so we'll have to respond quickly, and we'll learn and we'll understand how they're going to be used in the future, and they'll give us a really good glimpse of how the technology is going to develop, but that they're not so far developed as they might be 2, 5, 10 years from now to be posing the super big scary problems that they might at that point. So I'm hoping that we're actually in this nice sweet spot where we just get a warning shot, but we need to be aware that it might be the only warning shot we get, so let's take it seriously and pay attention. That also means when the UK elections come and go, that does not mean conversation over. We need to continue this conversation forward. The other thing that I think is a really great opportunity actually for the 2024 UK elections is it's an opportunity for the UK to really lead in showing responsible behavior among political campaigns for the use of generative AI in their campaign material and how they campaign. So like one thing we're doing at Demos right now is we're trying to put forward this election pledge to get commitments from major political campaigns around the use of generative AI. So these are high-level commitments, like committing not to use generative AI to produce intentionally misleading material, to label non-trivial uses. When when you do use it, label when you use it. Obviously, we're saying labels can be removed, but that doesn't mean don't do it. Let's set some standards from behavior. And then also committing not to amplify content that you know is misleading and artificially generated. And to try and finally to communicate these guidelines to wider party staff and volunteers. And obviously, there are going to be some issues in terms of like how executable are these plans really. It's something that I hear a lot in the space around AI and disinformation is, oh, well, that's not going to fix all the problems. That doesn't address the problem of the big state actors. That doesn't address the... That's not a reason not to start. This is going to be a multi-pronged issue, and we have to start taking little stabs here and there. And, you know, I think, you know, the UK's done a good amount of posturing and showing that it wants to lead in ethical AI and safe AI and, you know, the big AI safety summit. I think that this is an incredible place where they could start is setting these norms for behavior and go a long way towards helping underpin trust in politicians. I think we're at a place right now where it's not just the technology that's an issue. It's the fact that we also have like record low levels of trust in politicians for like record low over 40 years. And so we need to do a lot to just bolster those foundations of democracy as well. And we can start by having norms of conduct around the use of this technology.
Have any political parties signed up?
Not at this point. It's kind of a give. It's a give.
I'll sign up right now.
There you
Okay,
go.
yeah, it's a give and take that's going on right now. We are starting to look into getting actually a lot of civil society signatures to turn up the pressure. Is we've decided that that's actually the next step we're going to have to take. So if you want to talk about that, I can engage further.
Well, I'm sure it's great for the conversation afterwards to take it there.
Yeah.
Just I want to share one example of, this was before AI was as ubiquitous, if you can even say that, or being used. But there's an organization in Chile called Contodo that was trying to make up for what Jack Dorsey even said he screwed up with Twitter, which is not creating positive incentives for good behavior. And so what they did is they took the slate of all of the political candidates running in Chile. This was 2 cycles ago. And they decided that they had several passes at if there was lying, if there was fake content, if there was cheating, all of this stuff. Anytime something went public, they would take them off the list, and then they positively incented and threw money into, didn't matter what your political party was, into positive behavior, into a race, so creating a race to the top politics versus a race to the bottom. It's completely replicable in other places, and civil society supported it. So I think there's what political parties can do, but is what we can do as citizens in sort of rewarding good behavior. I mean, we're really good at telling people when we don't like things. We're not so good at telling people when we do like things. Like, we have I think we have the obligation to say, hey, thanks for running a good campaign, how we get race to the top. UK elections, Women's Equality Party,
Yeah.
AI, are you using it?
No, it depends what you mean by are we using it. If you mean are we doing using generative AI for party political broadcasts or whatever, no, not yet. I imagine a lot of chat GPT gets used to write political material. I'm a writer, so I absolutely do not use it for writing. I write
Not even drafts, Catherine?
I write so much better than chat GPT. I'm sorry if that sounds arrogant, but it's true.
But have you used Claude?
No, don't start on this.
Okay. First drafts with Claude, sometime, well, it's
Yeah,
lifesaver.
yeah. No. I mean, I have a whole book to write now, and the temptation is always going to be there, but I'm not going to do it. Oh God, lost my train of thought. No, I know, but okay, there was something else I wanted to say. But about the UK, one of the things that you will not see is anything sensible in people's manifestos about tech, about this issue. When I ran for the European Parliament in the last election here that we had, sadly, for the European Parliament, and I did a pretty basic section on tech in my manifesto, and all the tech correspondents said ours was the only manifesto that took tech seriously. It's literally not in there. And it's not in there on levels that matter, because this is also about getting people to understand the issues with it. So understand things, for example, like just the conditions under which people work, helping the training models, in poor countries in poor circumstances, if you're going to talk about ethics, you need to talk about the ethics of that. Sandy Toksvig, my co-founder of the Women's Equality Party, has come up with an amazing scheme, which will be in our manifesto, which is called Mappa Mundi. She's basically working at Cambridge University to try and create a sort of version of Wikipedia without the biases, which is an incredibly complicated job, and but it is acknowledging the fact that at the moment you have these things that are reinforcing inequality rather than challenging it. And it's not that we don't believe it's possible to have tools. Oh yes, so a tool that is good, that is great, that is out there, and that in fact some of your CASM colleagues have used is Polis. Do you know about Polis? So Polis, you talked about the world being polarized. Polis works on a reward system. So just as the algorithms on most social media reward you for being polarizing and generate, and it will amplify division, Polis rewards bringing people together. So the only way, if you are on Polis, the only way that you can advance your ideas on it is by winning people over to your ideas. And in Taiwan, they're actually using this for deciding, as a form of civic engagement to decide things. They used it, for example, to discuss taxi, whether Uber should be used in Taipei and that kind of thing. But it's really interesting. You can build things that will have these benign impacts, but they have to be used at scale, and they have to be used with that full understanding of what the problems are in the first place.
Well, Taiwan is a really interesting example of technologists going into politics and then making that bridge, right? Audrey Tang did this very well, and it's one of the reasons it's not just technology, like a deep belief in people that help them have the best.
Well, the revolution, they got into power by creating a simulacrum of the official government websites and putting onto the official government websites what should have been on the official government websites, and actually live streaming. When they occupied the parliament, they live streamed it. They did the most active civic engagement it's possible to imagine.
If you're interested in that story and just in general citizen engagement, John Alexander, who would be here tonight, wrote a book called Citizens, who talks about this. So I'm going to go to the audience, but I'm going to give you a heads up warning that I'm going to ask you each in one word to give me your magic wand for AI. It can be hyphenated, not yet, but I want to go to the audience for any questions. Anyone have any questions? Yeah, in the back, hi.
I really like the discussion about offensive defensive, and I think that's a really important discussion. I was really surprised by your example of defensive, because I would call that offensive. Tackling misinformation is not an AI-generated problem. Misinformation predates AI in really serious ways. It's been used in all sorts of ways. Tackling that is something which AI could do. I see that as offensive and not defensive. So I'd really like to get your thoughts on that. And that then comes back to you sort of saying prioritizing defensive right now is what we need. But if you consider that offensive, do you come more back to the sort of view that actually, no, it's these offensive efforts which are needed?
Basically, I agree with you. I think that we need to build a system of social antibodies, which is basically civic education. I think, in the UK, we're going to, and in the US, we're going to see some really horrible, obscene things done by right-wing politicians, far-right politicians, and by foreign state actors. And the question of whether people can understand what people are trying to do to them, how people are trying to hoodwink them, and have some kind of social response to that is really important. So, but you're right that, defense is sometimes offense.
And offense is sometimes
And
defense.
offense is sometimes defense.
I mean, my political mentor always taught me that. Be wary of the distraction of the defense from what
Yeah.
you really want. And I feel like for a long time, democracy's been playing defense and not offense. We have basically 18th century politics. That is not an offensive gesture when we have 21st century opportunities and challenges. People are dissatisfied,
Yeah.
in part because
For
of
good
non-state
reason.
and partially because non-state actors keep telling us how bad things are and
Mm.
dividing us. Do you have your magic wand in a word? No? Okay, back to you then, if you're not ready yet. Any more questions? I'll get to you. Any more questions, comments? Yeah, the back.
I haven't heard you mention anything around commercial organisations and their impact on this whole cycle. Have you got a view on how they are actually coming together and meeting you in this conversation to, as we say, that we've got a very short period of time to be able to address this. How is that coming together?
Can I ask a question? I'm really curious how many people here read Walter Isaacson's Musk biography, because I thought that kind of told you so many things that you needed to know, not just about, because of course Musk is one of the co-founders of OpenAI, and he did it because he thought that AI was a threat to the world. There is so much wrong with that biography. I worked with Walter Isaacson at Time magazine, by the way, I know him. And it sort of replicates so many of the things I think are wrong about the thinking now, or deficient in the thinking now, because it believes in this idea of the flawed genius. It believes in the idea of being able to save the world by these great big actions.
To be fair, Catherine, I have a different read on that. Perhaps that's your read of it.
What you mean, that book?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he totally buys into Musk as a flawed genius, and he puts in some
We're
sort
going to have a
of.
good dinner.
But the point about that is, you look at Thiel, you look at the people who have been involved in this and why they've been involved in it, and it's not about saying their politics are wrong. It's about saying these are people who are not in touch with the world as we know it. That they have these great big, lunar missions. Don't save the planet. Just put people on Mars. I'm sorry, but that's the opposite of a useful kind of politics. And so, in terms of some of the biggest commercial ventures, when you talk to people who are involved in VC funding, when you talk to people who are involved in AI, when you go to those AI conferences, you do get an awful lot of people who are thinking that way, and that's another thing that worries me. And it's not, we absolutely can puncture it, and all the stuff that Paul and Elizabeth have been talking about, we'll do that. Civic education is such a huge thing here, but that kind of grandiose thinking, flawed geniuses, no, they're just flawed.
Can I get your guys' quick response on that? And then we're going to go to your magic
Yeah.
wand quick question, and then back to you guys to end.
So for as many flawed geniuses there are that are pushing this forward, I've also worked with a lot of people in these tech companies that are taking the ethics and safety issues really serious. They are sometimes strangled by the lack of resources they're given. I keep dropping that pen. So that is an issue, but I think it's the issue is there's so much resource and money and power that is accruing to a handful of large tech companies. So when we talk about democratizing AI, we need to think not just about distributing the technology itself and making sure that everyone can access the technology. It's not just about making sure more people can develop the technology. It's about distributing influence over the governance of the technology. And this isn't all going to be through politics. We can also think creatively about democratic corporate governance structures. There's so much more we can do to make sure that this technology is actually responding to the needs of the values of the people who it's going to impact, who are not necessarily the people who are the direct users of the systems.
Paul?
There's a lot of bad things going on in the commercial entities, and one of them has been the gutting of the trust and safety teams, which were built up over the period after 2016. So it's not just at Twitter, but also Meta and in other places that those trust and safety teams are not in a position to do even the job they were doing in 2018, and the technology is not caught up to be able to fill that gap. There are good people, as you say, in these companies who are trying to do good things. I am very curious about whether, whether there is anything good. I wouldn't have said this 20 years ago. Whether there's any good role that can be played by Microsoft in this moment, partly because they are the ones holding Sam Altman's leash, if anyone is. Mustafa Suleiman, who's just gone in a senior role there, is probably one of the most good people in the AI world. Thinks very seriously about ethics, and at the same time, it's a Cambrian explosion. It's out of control. Nobody knows what they're doing, really, fundamentally. The emperor has no clothes, except that all of these clothes are flying around suddenly because we're in this world of, where nothing is true and everything is possible. So it's a very strange moment, and I think it's a moment where good people everywhere need to try and figure out what they can do and stay connected, and we will be learning very, very rapidly over the coming period, not least from crises and challenges and things that are very scary.
Elizabeth, your magic wand and a word or two.
I can't do that.
Effective labeling of deepfakes, that's fine.
Right now, effective labeling of deepfakes. Okay,
Yeah.
he did it. Challenge.
I think it's impossible.
I think just be responsible, behave responsibly in these next.
people.
Just good people do good things for these next few months.
Sometimes that sounds harder than the labeling of deepfakes, but I'm going to go with it.
I'm not sure that that's feasible though at this point.
Not at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
It's a magic wand, though.
Yes,
That's true.
You did a magic
Went
wand. Go
very
wild,
magical with
Elizabeth.
this.
Go wild.
Okay.
Catherine, you get your magic wand, your magic moment.
Yeah, it's a word that gets misused a lot, intersectionality, which is, if people actually understand the power imbalances and they incorporate an understanding of that in their approach to this topic and they resolve to work against those imbalances, then you're already in a better space.
Are you going to get her to sign your pledge tonight?
Sure, let's
Okay,
talk.
we'll take a photo. I'm going to ask you all for your one-word takeaway from tonight. I'm going to give you a moment. You only get a word, too. Ada. Intriguing. Don't say midgets. Your last words, I'll come back to you. Yee. Yeah, that's a scary one. Yeah.
Mine was yikes.
Yikes.
So much to learn.
So much to learn.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Interesting in the Chinese sense of the word.
Ooh, I want to write the character for us afterwards. I want to learn, yeah. Thoughtful. Unpredictable. Promising. Over here, Santiago. Eye-opening. Layered. Complex. Hopeful. Flattening.
I hear what you're saying about more power to people who have power, but I also think not democratizing because this is going the other way, but I think flattening and providing a lot of power.
Flattening. Exciting. Troubling. You two should sit next to each other. That's good. That's good. Have a drink afterwards. Yeah. Hopeful. Hopeful. Powerful. Overwhelming. Hug him. Somebody hug him. Optimistic. Concentrated. Cautiously optimistic. Yeah. Insightful. Concerning. Adam.
Education. The amount of stuff that just kind of come back to that more people need more.
Education. Hope. Thought-provoking. Yeah. Complex and fun. That says a lot about your brain right there, yeah? Clarified. Intriguing. Opportunity. Network. Inevitable. Depends. Good people. You get 2 words if it's good in people, yeah. Learning. All about people. Civic. Enormity. Nuanced. Responsible area in the back. Yeah. Good. Offense. Inspiring. All the way in the back, Rosie? Complicated? What? Trailblazing. How many people raise your hand if you feel, I'm going to give you a binary, more optimistic or less optimistic after this conversation? More optimistic. Raise them high so I can see them. Less optimistic.
What about sitting on the fence?
No sit, you can't sit on the fence, no. What do you think? We're not talking about politics, we're talking about making a decision right now. Well, what were we, more or less? About the same.
Even.
It was balanced.
It was balanced, about 50-50. Well, I really want to thank you all for coming tonight. I want to thank you for caring. I think it's quite easy to go into the world these days with just your eyes closed and just hope it all works out. But the fact that you're here gives me a lot of hope. And I do politics because I love people. And the fact that you're all here maybe means you love people too. So Rosie, you want to make any final comments?
Just a reminder that we will be continuing conversation in this on the third floor if you'd like to join us too. And yeah, please make sure that you talk to each other and take everything you've heard today. Thank you to the amazing panel. Can we have a round of applause for them?
We do a regular briefing about what's working in politics around the world that we'd be very happy to share whatever newsletters that you come up with. So if you want to keep following this, the good news, the offense, the politicians that aren't midgets, and just a little hope, stay in touch. So thank you very much. Have a great night.